I am Sarah, 29 years old. And until 8 weeks ago, I was just an ordinary elementary school art teacher living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped studio apartment. My grandparents practically raised me when my own parents were too busy chasing their careers. They were successful but humble, teaching me that integrity matters more than income. When they died in that devastating accident, I was heartbroken. Then came the attorney meeting where I learned they had left me their entire $32 million estate. The relatives who barely acknowledged them suddenly wanted everything. I refused. If you want to see money expose people's true nature, keep watching. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about holding firm when family reveals their real motives. Growing up, my parents were always around physically but emotionally distant. My father, William, worked 70-hour weeks building his consulting empire, while my mother, Victoria, spent her days cultivating relationships with influential social contacts. Family meals were scarce, and when they occurred, my parents were usually interrupted by business calls or networking obligations. They provided necessities, but affection and mentorship were lacking. From age 6, I spent every weekend and entire summer breaks with my grandparents, Margaret and Thomas. Their comfortable 5-bedroom home became my sanctuary. Despite considerable wealth, they lived modestly. Their 4-acre property featured an herb garden where Grandpa Thomas taught me to cultivate basil and oregano. Grandma Margaret showed me how to knit scarves from scratch and preserve homemade jam. They attended every art exhibition and talent show my parents missed. My grandparents created their fortune from scratch. They launched a modest construction company from their basement in the 1980s with just one crew and determination. By my birth, Thompson Construction had become a regional leader with 150 employees and 6 offices across 4 states. Yet their lifestyle never reflected their net worth. Grandpa drove the same work truck for 18 years. Grandma shopped clearance sales and grew vegetables to save money. They constantly reminded me, wealth is simply a resource, Sarah, not a measure of character. Use it to create something worthwhile, not to impress people who don't value you. This mindset created tension with my father. As their only son, he expected to inherit everything and live luxuriously. He criticized their thriftiness, calling them cheap and backward. What they viewed as practical living he saw as embarrassing restriction. They funded his university education, but required summer employment. After graduation, they provided assistance with a down payment on a reasonable starter home, not the penthouse he desired. The final rupture occurred when my father demanded an executive role at their company despite lacking relevant qualifications. My grandparents declined, explaining he must earn advancement like other employees. He exploded, accepting a corporate position elsewhere, and their relationship never recovered. With me, they took a completely different approach. They fully funded my education, enabling debt-free graduation, but they encouraged career choices based on fulfillment rather than salary. When I decided to become an art teacher, they were genuinely excited despite my modest starting wage. Throughout adulthood, I maintained close bonds with my grandparents. We shared weekly Sunday dinners without fail. I assisted them with modern technology, programming their tablets and explaining video calling. They shared family recipes and childhood stories. During holidays, I always stayed with them instead of my parents' house, creating constant tension with my mother, who interpreted this as personal rejection. I lived in a studio apartment roughly 25 minutes from my grandparents' home. It was cramped but comfortable, furnished with thrift store finds and houseplants. My salary at Riverside Elementary was modest but sufficient for my needs. I discovered happiness in simple activities like browsing used bookstores, exploring hiking trails, and volunteering at the community center. My grandparents appreciated my independent choices, occasionally surprising me with practical gifts like quality winter boots or a reliable coffee maker. 8 weeks ago, everything transformed. I was preparing lesson plans on a Wednesday evening when police called. My grandparents were returning from their weekly dinner date when an intoxicated driver ignored a stop sign, striking their vehicle at high speed. They perished immediately. The officer assured me they felt no pain, but offered little consolation. The memorial service passed in a fog. I remember my parents controlling arrangements, debating expenses with the funeral coordinator. My brother Marcus flew in from Seattle, spending most time checking emails. Aunt Linda sobbed theatrically when cameras appeared, stopping abruptly when filming ended. Uncle Robert lingered awkwardly in corners, following Aunt Linda like a lost puppy. None had visited my grandparents in years, yet suddenly they performed as the devastated family. I felt only numbness. The two people who genuinely knew and cherished me were gone permanently. Their home, once vibrant and welcoming, now stood vacant. I couldn't force myself to enter after the service. Instead, I returned to my apartment, requested bereavement leave from school, and attempted to navigate my transformed reality. 3 weeks after the memorial, I received a call from David Chen, my grandparents' lawyer. He requested that I, along with immediate family, visit his office for the will reading. I had no idea how that appointment would completely overturn everything I believed about my relatives. The will reading morning arrived overcast and humid, perfectly matching my emotional state. I reached Chen Legal Associates 20 minutes early, wearing a modest navy dress and carrying the emergency umbrella my grandmother had insisted I store in my vehicle. The office occupied a renovated colonial building downtown, its interior decorated with mahogany paneling and leather furniture. David Chen welcomed me with a compassionate handshake. He was in his 50s with graying temples and gentle eyes behind stylish frames. My grandparents had frequently mentioned him as both their attorney and trusted friend for over 25 years. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss, Sarah," he said softly. "Margaret and Thomas were remarkable individuals. I'll miss our monthly lunch meetings and her incredible chocolate chip cookies." His sincere grief made my eyes water. "Thank you," I managed. "They always spoke fondly of you too." Before we could continue, the reception door burst open, and my relatives arrived together. My father, William, entered first, impatiently checking his expensive smartwatch. At 58, he resembled an older, harsher version of my grandfather, minus the kindness. My mother, Victoria, followed, clutching her designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly salary. My 26-year-old brother, Marcus, strutted in wearing inappropriate sunglasses. His version of professional attire was a rumpled dress shirt half-tucked into khakis. Behind them came Aunt Linda, my father's sister, already speaking loudly on her phone about some drama from her yoga class. Uncle Robert trailed behind, acknowledging me politely but quickly looking away. They had been married for 22 years, but I rarely heard him voice more than brief sentences at family events. "All right, let's finish this," my father announced without greeting anyone. "Some of us have real companies to manage." David smiled diplomatically. "Certainly, William, please follow me to the conference room. We're all present now." The atmosphere was thick with tension as we arranged ourselves around a large walnut table. My father positioned himself at one end, as if asserting dominance, while I selected a seat near David's spot at the head. The others distributed themselves according to usual dynamics. My mother beside my father, Marcus next to her, Aunt Linda across from them, and Uncle Robert looking uncomfortable. "Before we proceed," David said, "I want to clarify that Margaret and Thomas were completely mentally competent when they revised their will 14 months ago. They were thorough in their deliberations and clear in their intentions." My father scoffed. "Just read it, David. We understand the process. Dad started the business. I'm his heir. Standard inheritance protocol." David ignored the interruption and opened a leather folder. He adjusted his glasses and commenced reading. "I, Thomas Thompson, and I, Margaret Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this our last will and testament." The formal legal terminology continued for several minutes, with David outlining revocations of previous wills and executor appointments. My relatives fidgeted impatiently. Finally, he reached the section everyone anticipated. "Hereby bequeath our entire estate, including but not limited to all liquid assets totaling approximately $9.5 million, our investment portfolio valued at approximately $15 million, all real property, including our primary residence, valued at $6.2 million, and our 30% ownership stake in Thompson Construction, valued at approximately $1.3 million. To our cherished granddaughter, Sarah Elizabeth Foster." The room became absolutely silent. I stopped breathing momentarily, convinced I had misunderstood. David continued. "We specifically and deliberately make no provisions for our son William Thompson, our daughter-in-law Victoria Thompson, our grandson Marcus Thompson, our daughter Linda Martinez, or our son-in-law Robert Martinez, as we have supported them during our lifetime, and have documented our reasoning with our attorney. Let me see that document, my father bellowed, jumping up so forcefully his chair toppled over. He grabbed the will from David's hands, scanning it desperately. This is insane, my mother protested. $32 million to an art teacher? She wouldn't understand basic financial management. Marcus pounded the table. What about me? I'm blood family too. I need funding for my tech startup ventures. Aunt Linda whirled toward me, her face crimson with rage. What did you do? How did you brainwash them into this decision? I sat stunned, unable to comprehend what was occurring. $32 million. My frugal grandparents had accumulated that amount, and they entrusted it entirely to me. David calmly retrieved the will from my father's grasp. If everyone will please sit down, there's additional information. Thomas and Margaret recorded a video explanation to be shown now. He activated a remote, and the wall-mounted screen illuminated. My grandparents appeared seated together on their familiar living room couch. My heart constricted seeing them alive again, looking exactly as during my last visit. Grandpa Thomas spoke first. If you're viewing this, we've passed away. We want to explain our choices directly to avoid confusion. Grandma Margaret continued. William, Linda, we love you as our children, but we've been profoundly disappointed by the priorities you've embraced and taught your children, except for Sarah. For several minutes, my grandparents explained how they had observed my father and aunt prioritize material accumulation over relationships, treating them as financial resources rather than beloved parents. They described years of missed family celebrations, unpaid loans, and dismissive comments about their practical lifestyle choices. The company we created, Grandpa explained, was never about hoarding wealth for status. It was about providing security for our family and opportunities for our workers. We built it through dedication, honesty, and fair treatment. Sarah consistently demonstrates these principles. Grandma added, she visits because she genuinely loves us, not because she wants something. She chose a profession helping children despite minimal compensation because it serves her purpose. We trust Sarah to honor our legacy and utilize these resources thoughtfully, not waste them on luxury items or risky schemes, Grandpa continued. The video extended several more minutes with my grandparents expressing hopes for how the inheritance might support education and community development, causes they had always supported, but lacked time to expand while managing their business. As the screen darkened, my father erupted. This is complete nonsense. They were obviously declining mentally. We'll challenge this will. No court will validate this madness. David remained composed. They anticipated that reaction, William. They completed extensive cognitive evaluations before finalizing this will, with multiple independent physicians certifying their competence. Additionally, they documented years of interactions that informed their decision. I must warn you that contesting will be extremely challenging, costly, and unlikely to succeed. My mother turned to me, her voice suddenly artificially sweet. Sarah, honey, you realize this isn't appropriate? Your grandparents were confused. This money belongs to the family, not exclusively you. You'll share it with us, won't you? I felt trapped with all attention focused on me. I need to process this, I stammered. I had no idea they would do this. Process it? Marcus scoffed. There's nothing to process. That money should be distributed fairly or managed by someone with actual business expertise, my father interrupted, meaning himself. As arguments intensified, David gently touched my shoulder. You don't need to decide anything today, Sarah. Take time to absorb this. My office will manage all immediate estate matters. He handed me a thick envelope. This contains all relevant documents, house keys, and contact information for their financial consultants. Call me anytime with questions. The meeting deteriorated into pandemonium after that, with lawsuit threats and accusations flying. David eventually requested everyone leave, citing another appointment. As we exited, my father gripped my arm harshly. This conversation isn't finished, he hissed. Come to our house tonight at 7. We'll resolve this as a family. His tone indicated this wasn't optional. I nodded weakly, too overwhelmed to resist. As they departed in their expensive vehicles, I remained in my 12-year-old compact car in the parking lot, holding the envelope and wondering how an inheritance meant as a blessing had so quickly become a burden. I spent the afternoon driving aimlessly through town before stopping at a peaceful lakeside park to collect my thoughts. The envelope from David sat unopened on my passenger seat. Part of me wanted to examine its contents to understand exactly what my grandparents had entrusted to me. Another part feared the responsibility it represented. At 6:50, I arrived at my parents' driveway, noting everyone else was already there. Their 6,000 square foot house towered before me, all marble and steel designed to impress rather than comfort. I took a steadying breath, grabbed the envelope, and went inside. They waited in the formal sitting room, a space used only for my mother's social events. My father stood beside the mantelpiece, crystal tumbler in hand. My mother perched on an uncomfortable-looking designer chair. Marcus lounged across the sofa, browsing his phone while Aunt Linda paced anxiously. Uncle Robert stood near the windows, staring outside as if longing to escape. Finally, my father said when I entered, "Sit down, Sarah." I chose a chair near the entrance, suddenly realizing I might need quick access to an exit. "Let's be practical about this," my father began, his corporate negotiation voice fully engaged. "Your grandparents obviously weren't thinking rationally. They intended for the family to benefit, not just you." My mother nodded eagerly. "Darling, managing wealth is complex. Your father has the expertise to handle this correctly. You can still receive a substantial portion, perhaps enough for a down payment on a proper house instead of that studio." The patronizing tone made my skin crawl, but I stayed quiet. Encouraged by my silence, my father continued. "Here's our proposal. You transfer the estate to me as the family's financial head. I'll ensure everyone receives their appropriate share. You'll get 8%, which is more than generous considering your limited expenses." 8%, I finally spoke. That would still be over $2.5 million. "Exactly," Marcus interjected. "More than sufficient for a teacher. I need at least $6 million for my blockchain gaming platform. It's revolutionary." I regarded him skeptically. Marcus had cycled through get-rich-quick schemes for years, never maintaining employment longer than 4 months. His previous venture, an app for rating coffee shops, had failed after consuming $75,000 of my parents' investment. "The house should come to us," Aunt Linda declared. "We have 4 children to consider. That district would provide them better educational opportunities." I nearly laughed at the irony. Aunt Linda had never visited my grandparents in that house. Her children, my cousins, were virtual strangers who sent generic holiday cards with Aunt Linda's handwriting. As the evening progressed, their strategies evolved. When demands failed, they shifted to guilt. "After everything we've provided for you," my mother said, her eyes artificially moist. "We gave you life, a stable home, opportunities. This is how you repay family loyalty." I nearly choked on my drink. Loyalty? When was the last time either of you called just to check how I was doing? When did you ever attend one of my art shows? My father changed tactics again. "We're not requesting, Sarah. We're informing you what will happen. Either you sign the transfer documents willingly, or we'll contest the will. We'll examine every questionable interaction you had with your grandparents. How frequently did you visit them privately? What did you tell them about us when we weren't present? It will become messy." The threat lingered ominously. I felt nauseated, but something inside me strengthened. A memory emerged of my grandfather teaching me to stand firm during a school conflict when I was 9. "Nobody can steal your dignity unless you surrender it, Sarah," he had said. "Know what's right and stand strong." Uncle Robert, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. "Maybe we should all relax and give Sarah time to think. This is overwhelming to process." My father turned on him. "Stay out of this, Robert. This is family business." "I am family," he responded quietly, but immediately withdrew when my father glared. As the clock approached 10, Marcus began drafting transfer documents on his laptop. My mother contacted their personal lawyer for advice on legal wording. Aunt Linda browsed real estate websites for my grandparents' house, discussing which walls she would remove first. They had already allocated my inheritance without my approval, planning how they would spend every dollar. Never once did anyone mention my grandparents' wishes or values. Never once did they ask my opinion about what should be done with the money. At 11:15, my father printed the hastily written transfer document and slid it across the coffee table with a pen. "Sign it," he commanded. I picked up the paper and read carefully. The language was comprehensive, essentially surrendering all my rights to anything my grandparents had left me. In return, I would receive a percentage to be determined later at my father's complete discretion. I placed the paper down and breathed deeply. The entire room went silent. "No." "What did you just say?" my father asked, his voice threateningly quiet. I said no, I won't sign this or anything similar. My grandparents trusted me with their legacy for specific reasons. I intend to honor that trust. My mother launched into a speech about ungratefulness. Marcus called me names I won't repeat. Aunt Linda began weeping dramatically about her children's future. Throughout it all, I remained motionless, the word no becoming armor around me. Finally, my father slammed his glass down so forcefully it shattered. "That's enough," he roared. "I always warned Dad you couldn't be trusted. You manipulated them just like you're trying to manipulate us now with this innocent performance." He approached me, pointing his finger inches from my face. "You have a decision to make immediately, Sarah. Either you sign that document and remain part of this family, or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself disowned. You can't have both." The ultimatum hung between us. I looked around at my family members' faces, searching for any trace of love or understanding. I found none. In that moment, I realized a devastating truth. They had never truly considered me family. I was just a potential source of money, nothing more. "I'm not signing," I said firmly, standing up. "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I must respect what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." "Then get out of my house," my father snarled. "Pack your belongings and leave tonight. You're no longer welcome here." "I live in my own apartment," I reminded him. "I have for years." He laughed coldly. "The apartment we co-signed for because your teacher's salary couldn't qualify for the lease. Check your rental agreement, Sarah. We own that complex through one of our investment companies. Consider your lease terminated." My stomach plummeted. He was correct. When I couldn't qualify for the apartment independently, they had offered assistance. I never realized they actually owned the building through a subsidiary company. "You have 45 minutes to pack essentials," my mother said, checking her watch. "The locks will be changed tomorrow." I stood frozen in disbelief. They were actually evicting me, making me homeless over money they had never earned. "Clock's ticking," Jason smirked. "Better move quickly, sis. Those $32 million won't keep you warm tonight." 45 minutes isn't long to pack your existence. I moved mechanically, gathering clothes, toiletries, important papers, and a few treasured items. My mind kept reeling with incredulity. How could they do this? How could money transform my family into complete strangers? My father stood in my bedroom doorway, arms folded, supervising me like a security guard, ensuring a prisoner didn't steal anything during removal. My mother remained downstairs, already calling a real estate agent about selling my grandparents' house, her voice echoing upstairs. "You were never really family anyway," my father said cruelly as I stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. "Your mother and I were planning divorce before she became pregnant with you. You were the obligation that trapped us together." The casual brutality of his revelation shocked me. I had always sensed I was unwanted, but having it confirmed so bluntly was devastating. "We've wasted enough time and resources on you," my mother added, appearing in the doorway. "Your private school tuition, orthodontics, summer camps, all those art lessons you showed no talent for. Consider this the end of our investment." Investment, not love or care, but investment, as if I were a stock that had underperformed. Marcus appeared next, leaning against the wall with a smug expression. "You'll regret this when you have nothing and nobody," he said. "That money will disappear faster than you imagine. And then what? You'll come begging back, and we'll remember how you chose cash over family." I zipped my final bag, fighting back tears. I was determined not to cry in front of them. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "Is that everything?" my father demanded. I looked around the room that had been mine since childhood, though I had only stayed here occasionally since college. The art awards from school, the framed degree, the bookshelf filled with novels and teaching materials, the photo albums. So much left behind. I can return for the rest later, I said. My father laughed. There won't be a later. Whatever you leave tonight goes to charity or disposal, your choice. The finality struck me. They were erasing me from their lives completely, all because I wouldn't give them money they had done nothing to deserve. I grabbed my grandmother's handmade quilt from the bed and crammed it into my already overflowing bag. I wouldn't abandon that. With 4 bags slung over my shoulders and another in my hand, I made my way downstairs. Nobody offered assistance. At the front door, I turned around one final time. My family stood in formation, faces displaying various expressions of anger, disappointment, and vindictive satisfaction. You might have money now, my mother said, but family is eternal. You'll realize what you've discarded. I'm not the one discarding family, I replied quietly. You are. With that, I walked out and into the cool night air. The door slammed behind me with chilling finality. Standing beside my car in the driveway, I suddenly felt everything collapsing. I was essentially homeless. My apartment was no longer available. My family had disowned me. In hours, I had gained millions but lost the only support system I had known, inadequate as it was. I sat in my car and finally let the tears flow. They poured down my face as I clutched the steering wheel, deep, shaking sobs that consumed my entire body. I cried for my grandparents, whose absence felt more acute than ever. I cried for the family I had always hoped for but never truly possessed. Mostly I cried for myself, suddenly adrift in a world that had completely transformed. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, I dried my eyes and started the engine. I had nowhere to go. Hotels required credit cards with sufficient limits I didn't possess. Friends were possible, but explaining this situation seemed impossible at nearly midnight. Then I remembered the envelope David had given me. Opening it, I found keys with a familiar butterfly-shaped keychain my grandmother had treasured, the keys to my grandparents' house, the house that was now incredibly mine. The drive to their neighborhood took 25 minutes. With each mile, I felt simultaneously drawn toward the comfort of their home and terrified of entering without them there. I had avoided the house since the funeral, unable to confront the emptiness. The porch light glowed when I arrived, probably automated by a timer my grandfather had programmed. I sat in the driveway for several minutes, gathering courage. Finally, I grabbed one bag and approached the front door, the key trembling in my hand. The house smelled exactly the same, a mixture of my grandmother's lavender potpourri and the furniture oil my grandfather applied to the woodwork every Sunday. I switched on the lights, half expecting to hear their voices calling greetings from the kitchen. The silence was overwhelming. I made my way to the guest room I had always occupied, dropping my bag on the bed. Everything remained exactly as I had left it after my last weekend visit 6 weeks before the accident. The sketchbook I had been working in still lay on the nightstand, pencils scattered nearby. Fresh sheets were folded on the dresser, placed there by my grandmother in anticipation of my next stay. The thoughtfulness of it, the expectation of continuity they couldn't have known would be broken, overwhelmed me again. I collapsed onto the bed and wept until exhaustion overtook me, falling asleep fully clothed above the covers. Morning arrived with disorienting sunshine. For a moment, I expected to smell pancakes cooking and hear my grandfather's off-key humming from downstairs. Reality crashed back as I recognized the silence. They were gone, and somehow I had inherited both their fortune and their adversaries, all in the form of my own family. My phone had exploded overnight with messages and missed calls, mostly from my father and mother, alternating between threats and sudden reconciliation attempts. "We can resolve this if you'll be sensible," read one message from my mother. My father was less diplomatic. "You have 48 hours to reconsider before we file legal action." Marcus sent a single text, "Enjoying the big empty house? Not for long." That last message sent chills through me. It sounded like a threat, not just posturing. I forwarded it to David, who responded immediately, "Stay where you are. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Don't open the door for anyone else." His urgency alarmed me, but also provided odd comfort. At least someone supported me. David arrived exactly 45 minutes later, carrying a briefcase and a cardboard drink carrier with 2 coffees. I led him to the kitchen where we sat at the breakfast nook, my grandparents had used for informal meals. First priority, he said, sliding a coffee toward me, your family has already contacted 4 different lawyers about challenging the will. I anticipated this and have prepared countermeasures. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. They evicted me last night. My father apparently owns my apartment building through some investment company. David nodded grimly. Classic William tactics, using leverage to force compliance. He began removing documents from his briefcase. What he didn't mention is that your grandparents prepared for this exact scenario. He showed me a deed to a small cottage about 30 minutes outside town. Your grandmother purchased this property 3 years ago as an investment, but maintained it in a separate trust for you. William doesn't know about it. You have somewhere to go if needed. Relief flooded through me. At least I wouldn't be homeless. But the idea of hiding while my family circled like predators didn't appeal to me. There's something else you should know, David continued. You're not alone in this. Your grandparents had many devoted friends and colleagues who understood the situation with your family. As if summoned, a knock sounded at the back door. David smiled. That would be Miguel. Miguel, the name was somewhat familiar. Miguel Santos, David explained. He's been your grandparents' property manager and groundskeeper for 12 years. He lives in the guest cottage at the back of the property. I answered the door to find a man in his early 40s with graying hair and compassionate eyes. He held his cap respectfully. Miss Sarah, he said warmly, I'm very sorry about your grandparents. They were exceptional people. I saw your car this morning and wanted to check if you needed anything. The simple kindness nearly brought tears again. Thank you, Miguel. I'm somewhat overwhelmed, honestly. Miguel nodded. Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Margaret worried about that. They asked me to watch over you if anything happened to them. The house, the grounds, everything is maintained. I've been keeping guard. David invited Miguel to join us at the table. Over the next hour, Miguel shared anecdotes about my grandparents that I had never heard, painting a portrait of 2 people who were respected and cherished by those who worked for them, not just their entitled relatives. Your father and brother, Miguel said carefully, they came here after the funeral when nobody was around. They took things, watches, jewelry, some electronics. I have it all recorded on the security cameras. My stomach tightened. My father had installed a comprehensive security system for my grandparents years ago, supposedly for their protection. I had forgotten about the cameras. Miguel shook his head sadly. They didn't know Mr. Thomas had me upgrade the system last year. He didn't trust the old one your father installed, said it had too many vulnerabilities. David made a note. That footage could be valuable if they pursue legal action. There's more, Miguel continued. Mrs. Margaret kept detailed diaries. She documented everything, especially family visits and conversations, there in her study. I followed Miguel to my grandmother's small study off the main corridor. A built-in bookcase contained dozens of leather-bound journals, each carefully dated. Miguel pulled one from the shelf and handed it to me. This one covers when your father requested money last year for some investment opportunity, he said. I opened the journal immediately, recognizing my grandmother's precise handwriting. June 22, William visited today, first time in 9 months. Didn't inquire about our health or activities. Immediately launched into presentation about real estate investment requiring $300,000. When Thomas declined, William became aggressive, accused us of favoring Sarah, claimed we were foolish to trust her when she only visits to secure her inheritance. Completely wrong. Sarah has never requested money, has no knowledge of our net worth, brings homemade soup every Sunday and stays to eat with us. William left without finishing his tea. Thomas very disturbed afterward. I read entry after entry, each documenting years of similar encounters. My father demanding money. My brother proposing ridiculous business ideas. My mother making barely concealed comments about their modest lifestyle, embarrassing her social status. In contrast, my visits were described with genuine warmth. My grandmother noted small gifts I had brought, conversations we had shared, assistance I had offered around the house. She perceived me in ways my parents never had. As I read, the doorbell chimed. Miguel went to answer, returning with an elderly woman in a sensible dress and sweater. Patricia Williams, he introduced her, your grandparents' housekeeper for 18 years. Patricia embraced me tightly. You look exactly like Margaret when she was young. She said she was so proud of you. Over the following hours, more people arrived. Elena Rodriguez, my grandparents' business partner, who knew every detail of Thompson Construction and offered to guide me through understanding the company. James Kim, their investment consultant, who brought comprehensive portfolios showing exactly how my inheritance was structured. Helen Murphy, their neighbor for 25 years, who brought homemade soup and stories about community events I had attended as a child. Each person who arrived brought not only information but genuine affection. They had all loved my grandparents and, by extension, cared about me and my welfare. While organizing my grandmother's desk, Patricia found a hidden compartment containing letters from my father spanning decades. Each requested money, some with barely veiled threats about limiting access to me if they refused. She also kept this, Patricia said, handing me a flash drive. Security footage from after the funeral. Your mother was searching through Margaret's jewelry before the reception even began. She took several valuable pieces, claiming Margaret would have wanted her to have them. My grandparents, it appeared, had been documenting my family's behavior for years, perhaps knowing this confrontation would come. They had created not just financial security for me, but a network of support and evidence that would protect their intentions. Around 5:00 in the afternoon, as David was guiding me through complex financial documents, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Hope you're enjoying Grandma and Grandpa's house while you can. Dad, Mom, Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, and I are coming over tomorrow morning at 9:00 to collect what rightfully belongs to us. Better not try to stop us, or things will get unpleasant. I showed the message to David, whose expression darkened. Threats and potential breaking and entering, he muttered. I think it's time to activate the final part of your grandparents' plan. He made several phone calls in succession, speaking cryptically about meetings and evidence. When he finished, he turned to me with a determined expression. Your grandparents anticipated this exact scenario, Sarah. They knew William and the others wouldn't accept their decision. They prepared for it. Tomorrow morning, we'll be ready for them. But tonight, I suggest you review these materials so you understand exactly what you're defending. He gestured to the pile of journals, financial documents, and legal papers spread across the dining room table. Your grandparents built more than just wealth. They built relationships based on trust and respect. That's their true legacy to you. As everyone except Miguel left for the evening, promising to return the next morning, I felt strange calmness settling over me. I wasn't alone in this battle. My grandparents had ensured that they had given me not just their money, but their wisdom and their community. I spent the evening reading through journals and financial reports, getting to know my grandparents in new ways. They had been strategic, thoughtful, and careful in their planning. Everything they had done was intentional, including their choice of heir. For the first time since the will reading, I felt equal to the responsibility they had entrusted me with. I wouldn't disappoint them. As I prepared for bed, another text arrived from Marcus. Better sleep with one eye open, sis. Tomorrow you'll learn what happens to people who steal from this family. Instead of fear, I felt determination solidifying within me. Tomorrow would indeed show what happens when people try to steal from family, but not the way Marcus anticipated. I woke early the next morning, nervous but resolved. By 7:30 a.m., David had arrived with coffee and breakfast pastries, along with a thick folder of legal documents. These are restraining orders ready to be filed if necessary, he explained. And these are cease and desist letters addressing the specific threats Marcus made. Patricia arrived next, immediately taking charge of the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The familiar aromas of bacon and coffee filled the house, providing strange comfort before the approaching confrontation. By 8:45, the house had filled with supporters. Miguel positioned himself by the front entrance as a silent guardian. Elena Rodriguez, my grandparents' business partner, set up her laptop at the dining table, ready to present financial evidence if needed. Patricia moved around efficiently, ensuring everyone had coffee and food, her presence alone a connection to my grandparents' hospitality. At 8:55, Vehicles began entering the long driveway. First, my father's black luxury sedan, then my mother's white SUV, followed by Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert's flashy red convertible, and finally Marcus's impractical sports car he could only afford because my parents covered his living expenses. "They're early," David observed, trying to catch us unprepared. As the doorbell rang aggressively, followed by pounding, David nodded to Miguel, who opened the door. My father stood on the threshold, momentarily surprised to see someone other than me answering. Behind him, the rest of my family clustered together, expressions ranging from furious to smug. "Where is Sarah?" my father demanded. "This is family business." Miguel remained immovable. "Miss Sarah is expecting you. Please come in." My family filed into the foyer, stopping abruptly when they saw the gathering in the living room. I stood in the center, David slightly behind me to my right. "What is this?" my mother asked, her voice sharp. "You brought strangers into a private family matter." Before I could respond, the front door opened again, and 3 more people entered. First came Judge Catherine Morrison, a distinguished woman in her 60s who had been my grandparents' friend for decades. She was followed by Police Captain David Rodriguez, whose son's education had been supported by my grandparents' charitable foundation. Last came Lisa Chang, my grandparents' financial advisor for over 15 years. My father's face drained of color at seeing Judge Morrison. The judge had ruled against him in a contract dispute years earlier, a case my father had tried unsuccessfully to influence through political connections. "Catherine," he said, attempting a friendly tone that sounded forced, "what brings you here?" The judge's expression remained stern. "I'm here at the request of Thomas and Margaret Thompson, through their attorney David Chen. They asked me, in the event of their deaths, to serve as an impartial witness to any family disputes regarding their estate." My mother turned to Captain Rodriguez. "This is absurd. We're here to collect family heirlooms that rightfully belong to us. Why is law enforcement present?" The captain smiled coldly. "I'm here as a friend of the Thompson family, not in an official capacity, unless, of course, someone commits a crime, in which case my official duties would naturally take precedence." The implied warning wasn't lost on anyone. As if orchestrated, the back door opened and 8 more people entered, forming a semicircle behind me. They were longtime employees from my grandparents' business, people who had known my father since childhood and witnessed his transformation from entitled son to absent family member. "You've got to be joking," Marcus muttered. "Is this supposed to intimidate us?" I stepped forward, finding strength in the support surrounding me. "I know why you're here. You believe you're entitled to my grandparents' estate despite their explicit wishes. You think you can intimidate or threaten me into giving you what you want." My father's face hardened. "Those old fools were manipulated. We're simply here to correct that injustice." From behind me, Lisa Chang spoke up. "Actually, William, I have documentation of every attempt you made to access your parents' assets over the last 15 years. She opened a folder. "This includes the unauthorized withdrawal attempt from their business account in 2018, the fraudulent signature incident in 2020, and your attempt to have Margaret declared incompetent last year after she refused to fund Marcus's failed NFT marketplace." My father's face reddened. "That's completely out of context." Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, tablet in hand. "I also have records of the company loan you never repaid, William. $175,000 borrowed in 2015 for your vacation property in Colorado. Your parents never pursued collection, though they certainly could have." One by one, my grandparents' friends and associates presented evidence of my family's attempts to extract money over the years, contrasted with their minimal involvement in my grandparents' actual lives. Aunt Linda, who had been quietly fuming, suddenly turned to me. "You manipulative little snake. You turned our parents against us, filled their heads with lies." Judge Morrison cleared her throat. "Actually, Mrs. Martinez, I reviewed the video diaries Margaret kept. There was no external influence. Your parents were quite explicit about their reasoning." "This is all very dramatic," my mother said dismissively, "but it changes nothing. We'll contest the will, we'll win." David stepped forward. "I've prepared documentation for all of you. It includes evidence that would become public record if you contest the will." He handed each family member a thick envelope. This includes banking records, text messages, emails, and video evidence of your interactions with Thomas and Margaret over the past decade. I encourage you to review it before making decisions about legal action. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with threats of lawsuits and accusations flying. David eventually asked everyone to leave, stating he had another appointment. As we filed out, my father grabbed my arm roughly. "This discussion isn't over," he hissed. "Consider what you're throwing away, your entire family over money." His grip was painful, but I looked him directly in the eyes. "I'm not throwing away family. I'm protecting the legacy of the only family members who ever truly loved me." As they departed in their separate luxury vehicles, I sat in my inherited home, surrounded by people who had genuinely cared about my grandparents. The weight of responsibility felt less crushing with their support. 6 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm. The first weeks after the confrontation were challenging, filled with legal paperwork, financial decisions, and the painful process of accepting that my biological family had chosen greed over relationship. They made a few token attempts to reconcile, but only when they needed something, proving nothing had fundamentally changed. With guidance from David and my grandparents' advisors, I established the Margaret and Thomas Thompson Foundation for Arts Education, dedicating $12 million to supporting underprivileged students and schools in our region. The foundation focused particularly on creative programs and technical training, areas my grandparents had always believed were undervalued. I returned to teaching elementary art, much to the surprise of those who assumed I would quit after becoming wealthy. My classroom at Riverside Elementary became a demonstration of what was possible with proper resources. I personally funded new art supplies, books, and technology that the school budget could never accommodate. Every student received healthy snacks daily and winter clothing if needed, small expenses for me that created enormous differences in their lives. Under Alina Rodriguez's mentorship, I learned fundamentals of operating Thompson Construction. While I didn't take an active management role, I ensured the company maintained my grandparents' principles, including their profit-sharing program for workers and comprehensive retirement benefits. The business continued prospering, providing stable employment for over 120 people in our community. My grandparents' house, once painfully empty, gradually became home again. I moved from the guest room into the master bedroom, though it took months before I could sleep there without feeling like an intruder. With Miguel's help, I converted the large basement into a community space for foundation events and educational workshops. Patricia still came twice weekly, refusing to fully retire despite my insistence she had earned it. My family made periodic attempts to reestablish contact, though their motivations were transparent. My father called when his consulting firm faced financial difficulties, hinting broadly about short-term investments with attractive returns. My mother reached out when her social circle learned about my foundation, suddenly wanting to serve on the advisory board. Marcus texted when his latest venture collapsed, requesting startup capital. Aunt Linda called around holidays, suggesting family should reunite, especially relatives with large houses suitable for hosting celebrations. Each time, I politely but firmly maintained my boundaries, referring them to the conditions I had established after the confrontation. I would consider a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care, but not one based on financial exploitation. None could meet those simple requirements. Instead, I built new traditions with the chosen family my grandparents had cultivated. Sunday dinners continued, now hosted by me with rotating guests including Alina, David, Miguel and his family, Patricia, and others who had been part of my grandparents' circle. We celebrated holidays together, shared achievements, and supported each other through challenges. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it was a community bound by something stronger than genetics, shared values and authentic affection. One clear autumn morning, similar to the day of their accident, I visited my grandparents' graves for the first time since the funeral. I brought fresh flowers and sat on the small bench nearby, finally ready to have the conversation I had been postponing. "I'm trying my best to honor what you built," I told them, feeling only slightly self-conscious speaking aloud. "The foundation is making a real difference. 5 students have already received full college scholarships who otherwise couldn't have attended. Your employees still speak about you with such admiration." A gentle breeze rustled the nearby trees, sending crimson leaves spiraling downward. It was the kind of beautiful fall day my grandmother had cherished, perfect for baking and reading by the fireplace. I wish you were here to see everything, I continued. I have so many questions about decisions you made, investments you chose, people you helped, but I'm learning step by step. In the months since inheriting, I had discovered numerous quiet charities my grandparents had supported anonymously. Children whose medical expenses they had covered, families whose homes they had saved from foreclosure, employees whose children they had put through college, all without public recognition or acknowledgement. Thank you for trusting me, I whispered. I understand now why you made the choice you did. It was never really about the money. It was about values, about using resources for something meaningful rather than status or power. As I sat there, memories flowed over me, not with the sharp pain of recent grief, but with bittersweet appreciation for the time we had shared. I remembered my grandfather teaching me to paint watercolors, my grandmother showing me how to make her famous apple crisp, both of them attending every school art show and graduation when my parents were too occupied. The inheritance had never been primarily about money. It had been about entrusting me with their legacy, their values, their vision of what wealth could accomplish when used with purpose and compassion. The next day, I hosted the foundation's first major event, a scholarship ceremony for 25 high school seniors who would receive full college funding. As I watched these bright, determined young people accept opportunities that would transform their futures, I felt my grandparents' presence strongly. Among the recipients was Isabella Martinez, a talented young woman who reminded me of myself at that age, full of potential, but constrained by financial limitations. She planned to become an art therapist to serve her community just as she had been supported. As the event concluded, Isabella approached me, tears in her eyes. My parents both work multiple jobs, she said. Nobody in my family has ever attended college. This changes everything, not just for me, but for my younger brothers who now see it as achievable. In that moment, I understood completely what my grandparents had been building all along. Not just a business or fortune, but a legacy of positive impact, a ripple effect that would continue long after they were gone. They had trusted me to amplify that effect, to carry their values forward in ways they would never witness but had envisioned. The money had indeed revealed true colors, showing me who valued wealth over relationship. But it had also revealed a community of genuine connection, people who had loved my grandparents for who they were, not what they owned. That was the true inheritance, more valuable than any dollar amount. As I move forward, I continue teaching, running the foundation, and learning the business. The wealth allows me to amplify meaningful work, but it doesn't define me. I still live relatively simply, drive a practical car, and spend weekends volunteering rather than shopping. My grandparents would approve, I think. They always said money was a tool, not a goal. I finally understand what they meant. What's your experience with family and inheritance? Have you ever had to stand up to pressure from loved ones to do what you knew was right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground. Remember, family is about love and respect, not obligation or exploitation. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the strength to honor your own values, whatever challenges you may face.